Hey everyone, welcome to Locked On Lakers for Monday. Brian Kamenetsky, Andy Kamenetsky. We had them on to tell you who the Lakers might draft, and now we're going to tell you about who the Lakers did draft. Scouting reports from Mike Garcia at Canyon Driver, Lakers draft expert. That's coming up next.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks to everybody for making Locked On Lakers first listen of every day, Monday through Friday. No matter how or where you get your podcast, it's always going to be free. It is never going to be behind a paywall. And Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you can go to hang out with Andy. We're getting, if you're doing this by math, Andy, we are closer to 18 now than 17. So I'm just going to say almost 18,000 subscribers, all itching to learn more about who the Lakers took on draft night, not just the two guys that they took in the first two rounds, but also the two guys they signed to two-way deals. The Lakers using up both of their two-way deals right after the draft, signed two guys. So we'll get into all of that with Lakers draft expert Mike Garcia. He was on Wednesday before the draft last week, and we told him we'd love to have him come back, and he agreed to do it. Mike, thanks so much for coming back.
I appreciate you guys having me.
He, of course, is the host of the Lakers Draft Scouting Substack, which you should all subscribe to. And you can find him at Canyon Driver on Twitter. We're going to break down everybody from, Jalen Hood-Schifino and Maxwell Lewis. And then, the two guys they drafted, they took as two-way guys. So we'll get to that before we're all done. Were you surprised, Mike? Were you pleased? What was your general feeling about what was available and what the Lakers did kind of broadly before we dive into who these players are on draft night?
I was pleased with the situation, especially considering I know that the Lakers have a process that they have about the draft and they follow through with it. And as long as they followed through with it, I later heard reports that they ranked him considerably higher. That says a lot about him as a player on and off the floor. So the things that are off the floor we're not privy about, but I was really happy about the pick overall.
Well, I mean, off the floor, we have learned that he is at least serious enough about conditioning and training and all that stuff that he became a vegetarian, which regardless of whether you think that's effective for a player or not, it takes dedication that they began in high school. He's by all accounts a pretty solid kid, pretty good head on his shoulders. So that's a good start. As far as the on the court, though, that you have seen a lot of with Jalen Hood-Schifino, what's your impression of him, strengths, weaknesses, even before we start getting into where he could fit for possibly some playing time as a rookie?
So on the floor, the thing he did best was execute pick and roll situations and really knock down contested mid-range shots. As a freshman, he was doing a lot of exploration within that particular play type, especially hitting Trace Jackson Davis as the roll man, finding corner shooters. The spacing was really tight in Indiana. So in a lot of cases, I think he just chose to opt to take that mid-range shot, and he's really efficient at it. He took a really high volume, and I think he shot roughly 52% from that 2-point range outside of the rim. So that says a lot.
So some of the things that people talk about, like it's funny, like Andy and I, as we noted last week in our conversation, we're not people who spend a lot of time breaking down film. When I say a lot, I mean any. And so when names get called, that's when we go back and we start looking at the highlight tapes that people put together and all that. And both of us were struck by the sort of the pace that Hood-Schifino plays at. He's not overly quick. He's not, somebody's like, where like he's clearly trying to use dominant athleticism or something like that to overtake a defense. Very smooth looks on tape, very methodical. In some ways, to be honest, kind of a right-handed D'Angelo Russell. Do you see some of that in terms of the pace and the style that he plays at?
I do. And I even recall watching D'Angelo Russell during his year in college. And one of the things he excelled at was that mid-range 2-point shot. It was a lot more of a traditional jump shot as more of a set shot that he is now. but he was really good at that along with that 3-point range, and that got him selected way earlier in the lottery. In Hood-Schifino's case, it's also about showing that patience within that play type, especially when it's a poorly spaced offense. You're seeing 3-4 defenders all in the paint, and you're the guy, and the roll man is also the guy. Finding that patience and then just trying to make the correct decision within that play type is really critical, and it's really tough to do, especially for a freshman. So I definitely see the common link with D'Angelo Russell.
Given the way Hood-Schifino tends to play at that very methodical pace, like, he's not somebody that looks to overtake through explosion. There's a lot of craftiness, a lot of measured pace. Do you think that can help offset some of the issues that most rookies have with just feeling sped up while they're out there, and the game in general being sped up, just that his pace is not sped up to begin with?
That is actually one of the most important transitions from college, international, or G League play all the way into the NBA. All rookies that I know get sped up, and it's the ones that become more physically built, more patient, and just being able to absorb contact and not get rattled that succeed early. We saw a little bit of that with Austin Reeves, where maybe he was a little bit slighter of frame, but he was taking some contact and he was still attacking the basket. He was being patient with the shot. So hopefully that's what we're going to see out of Jalen Hood-Schifino as well.
The other thing that obviously keeps guys on the floor as young players is defense. And the Lakers, talked a lot about Rob Pelinka spoke after the draft, talked a lot about what they feel is really strong defensive potential from Hood-Schifino to defend at multiple positions. It's a long kid, 6'6" in shoes and so on. Hood-Schifino, and this is also important, talked a lot about his defense too, and the desire to be an excellent defender and understanding, the confidence that he believes he can guard, 3 positions on the floor effectively. I wouldn't expect anybody to come in and just dominate defensively. Very, very rare is the rookie that can do that. But do you feel like from what you've seen on the tape that he has the potential to defend adequately enough to give the Lakers, 15 minutes a night if they need him to throughout the course of the season?
That'll depend heavily on matchup. I don't expect him to defend starting level players from the jump, but his level of awareness and general physicality, he does have 6'10" plus arms. He's a really stout guard at roughly 210, 220 pounds. That's basically NBA size on average for that guard position at either spot. So you can tell that the physicality is there, the strength is there, and the tape also showed that, hey, he was aware of where he was defensively. If he's off the ball, he's chasing guys, he's fighting through screens. If he's on the ball, he's pressuring players in the best way that he can, and he has some of that lateral quickness to keep up with guys along with the proper reactions. So those are a lot of important tools to kind of stick at the next level, especially when the NBA is so stacked with talented guards.
One of the knocks on Hood-Schifino is that the 3-point shot isn't there for him. It's pretty inconsistent. He does, though, have that mid-range shot that we talked about. How much confidence would you have in terms of what you've seen that he can eventually learn to extend that range? Like, when you see a guy that's good from 15 feet, 18 feet, generally speaking, do you think that's a pretty good template for somebody that can eventually find that range?
I definitely think it's a good template. It's kind of traditionally more thought of as a player having soft touch around the rim or within 10 feet from the hoop, like floater touch would be a good indicator of that. I lean more towards the contested mid-range shot in that he might be slightly off balance. His vision might be blocked from the rim a little bit, and he's still able to hit the shot. Those are the kind of shots that Jalen Hood-Schifino has been hitting. As for extending the range, I think that comes with adjusting to NBA defenses. They're faster, they're stronger, they're taller, they're longer, and NBA strength and conditioning, in the sense that that'll happen for every rookie anyway. And then like a natural progression with the shot will just be adding that range and having that same kind of relaxed shot into the follow through, extended all the way out to 3-point range. So I am confident. It's just a matter of time before it actually happens.
The other thing about that, real quick, before we break here, is that I saw a lot of Lakers fans concerned about his free throws and his free throw percentage, but he was up around 77%. Are there any red flags in your mind in his raw free throw percentage? Because that's another metric people often look at.
I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with shooting 77% from the free throw line. I mean, that's right around where LeBron shoots for his career. Right. So the only other concern might be the number of attempts at the rim, in which I would say, as I've alluded to before, Indiana played with very limited spacing. Everything was packed in the paint. So it's really hard to get those shots. But what is he doing? He's hitting the roll man for Trace Jackson-Davis for those finishes. So I'm not going to blame him for not taking layups at every single drive, at every single opportunity when the pick and roll led to the high percentage shot by the big. That's essentially what you want out of the play type in the first place. Hopefully, down the line, it'll expand into finishing at the rim by himself when he gets more space.
I just saw that. I saw the Lakers fans saying, "Oh, he can't shoot free throws." I looked it up. I was expecting to be like 58%. I was like, it's 70.
I had seen some scouting on him that he was not considered great at the line. I don't know if maybe he was inconsistent. Like, he would swing pretty wildly and ended up at 77% from that, or it was maybe weighted from a few games, but
it was a better number than I thought.
Well, some of the fans might have been freaking out by me relaying some of what I read in scouting reports. All I'm doing is just trying to take up for some of the listeners and viewers that might have been part of where it came from. That's it.
Man of the people. Before we get to Maxwell Lewis, I do have one more question about the Hood-Schifino thing, because while players like Jet Howard, for example, who were potentially linked to the Lakers and thought of as a good fit in LA, were already off the board. There was a very high profile player that slipped to the Lakers that had a lot of fans wondering whether or not the Lakers did the right thing. So we'll do that next.
Locked on Lakers is brought to you by eBay Motors, and for a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit, and it's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right, so the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you need to make sure every part you need fits right, and the first time around, you can be sure of this. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back. And just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. So get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply.
Okay, so Mike Garcia, Lakers draft scouting. We talked about a bunch of players on Wednesday's show last week, leading into the draft. Guys like I mentioned, Jet Howard. There's some other dudes. One guy we did not talk about at all was Cam Whitmore, who ended up being the big slipper in the draft on Thursday, falling from an expected maybe even top 5. Some people thought down to 20. To Houston. And I know when he got to the Lakers, there were a lot of fans who were disappointed that the Lakers didn't take him. I suspect, I do not know, I suspect, but that the Lakers didn't work him out. There's no way that Cam Whitmore was going to come work out for a team drafting 17. I'm sure they watched film, but I doubt they ever saw him in person, spoke to him. Were you surprised that the Lakers didn't take him? Would you have taken a swing on a guy like that with questions about his motor, questions about his health, but top 5 potential in the draft? Just kind of in your way of thinking about things.
I think it's critical for a team to follow through on their process, especially when there's been such a track record of success. There aren't any really unnecessary risks that needed to be taken. And from what I saw of Cam Whitmore, I think I had him ranked 9th on my board. That was a little bit lower than other people. There are certain things about his game that I wasn't completely confident in that other people may or may not have noticed about his game overall. So as long as the team follows through on their process and they have a full understanding of a player, because I definitely agree that the skills on the court and the way a player acts off the court and how they plan to become a more developed professional is very important to success in the NBA, generally speaking. We're trying to find a future NBA player who's going to stick around for a long time, not just, Cam Whitmore is a great athlete and he has a lot of great basketball attributes, but if I don't know any flags about him and I don't have any other information, there's no reason for me to take that unnecessary risk.
Let's look at Maxwell Lewis, because I know you were a guy who had him higher on your board than some other people did, and your reaction on Twitter was pretty excited that they were able to get him at 40. What do you see in him, and why do you see so much potential and value there for the Lakers to get a guy like that 2 years at Pepperdine with the 40th pick?
So with Maxwell Lewis, he has that wing height and wingspan, along with certain movement patterns. I'm not a biomechanical expert. I'm not a doctor, but I do notice, for example, when he attacks on drives, he gets really low to the floor, like as if his shin is almost parallel to the floor, like a track and field athlete, right? You start from the base and then the gun goes off and then you start off the run. When he attacks off the drive, it's like his first initial step or two is literally that low to the floor and he pushes outward. And on top of that, he has that 3-level shooting ability. That kind of ability is just really hard to find, generally speaking. So he's absolutely a 3-point threat. He was treated as one in college. And when people closed out on him, he hit those contested mids. And then when they contested that, he was at the rim, finishing at the rim in coordinated ways where, hey, this guy finishes with his left hand and it's with a dunk, or he's really explosive at the rim. There's someone else around because he blew by both guys. So that's why I was really excited for the Maxwell Lewis pick and why I ranked him so highly.
A lot of what I've read about Lewis is that he's a talented, but at times kind of wild scorer. Like, he has all the tools that you would want defensively, but there's going to be a lot of refinement required. His attentiveness, particularly off ball, can just be pretty bad. He's a really good athlete. Like we brought up before, he has insane length. Like Sam Vecini from The Athletic listed him as having an 8-foot standing reach, which is just crazy for a
Lakers love those dudes with long arms. Like THT's got those long go gadget arms.
And that basically he is, even as someone who's more experienced than, say, Hood-Schifino, he's more of a project. That's the general consensus I've seen. A, do you agree with that assessment? And B, if you do, how long would you imagine it taking to sort of start refining Lewis?
So defensive awareness is a tricky thing to kind of develop. There are inherent things in certain players where they're just actively engaged at all times, right? And that's not something you can easily find on a statistic. You just have to watch the tape. Sometimes players are treated as the number one option and will kind of take a backseat on defense a little bit, and that might be part of the attention issue. But the other part is how much of it is related to the team defensive scheme. How much is the team communicating defensively overall? And if you're a playoff team like the Lakers, those kinds of qualities tend to be more refined. We're going to run pick and roll coverage this way. When you're defending this player, I want you to trail the player because he's going to roll off the screen. When the help is coming, it's going to be Anthony Davis who's got your back. So I need you to take this defensive angle. Plus the constant communication, that'll help with the awareness factor. The next part of it is getting that to an NBA speed, and that's the difficult part. Sometimes it takes at least a couple years. We saw Austin Reeves just be competitive defensively as a rookie, and then this most recent season, hey, he's a little bit more physical, he's a little bit more athletic, but the defensive awareness become a lot easier because he had the reps from his rookie year. So now he knows what to do. And 2 years later, it's like, oh, okay, well, we have a playoff defender, at least that we're comfortable with on the floor, and that's what matters. So sometimes it's 2 years, sometimes it's a little bit longer, but we hope that Lewis can get there sooner than later.
One more question about Maxwell Lewis. We'll do that after the break. We'll also talk about Demoy Hodge and Colin Castleton, the two guys the Lakers signed to two-way contracts this offseason following the draft. Reminder, you now have 3 with the new CBA. You get 3 of these guys. So Cole Swider still around probably means the end of Scottie Pippen Jr., though. I think it actually officially does. But anyway, so a little more on those guys coming up next. Okay, so my last question about Lewis. I mean, obviously, unlike Hood-Schifino, I don't think the Lakers, if Maxwell Lewis is playing a lot this year, things have gone either so extraordinarily right that it's shocked the world, or horribly wrong. And I think it's much more likely that it's the latter. But one of the things that, when you're talking about a guy like that who is the primary focus on a bad team, a bad Pepperdine team, he's going to come to the Lakers and become a role player. Presumably on a good team, even, as the Lakers turn things over, and then you generally draft a guy in the second round expecting him to fit in a different way as part of your rotation, unlikely to be a foundational star. It happens occasionally, but it's not. What is that? How do you scout for that kind of transition? What skill sets are you looking for to tell me that this guy, who we're never going to need him to be an 18-point a night scorer like he was in his second year at Pepperdine, can come and fill the roles that we want him to fill? How do you find that in a second round pick through the noise of something like what's happening at Pepperdine?
That is a very tough question. That is a huge transition for a lot of college players who were the top usage guy on their team, and all of a sudden they're going to be the role player. That's going to be what happens to Trace Jackson Davis. That's going to be what happens with Jalen Hood-Schifino. That's probably what's going to happen with Maxwell Lewis. In some cases, you hope that they had prior experience as a role player and then accepting that role really well. We saw that with Austin Reeves early, at least I did, for Wichita State. And he was that spot up corner guy. He was insanely efficient and he competed. And then his role completely flipped as to being the number one guy. So in Lewis's case, it's about accepting his role with the team early on. And young players have to be competitive and do what they do best, and then accept their role within the team in order to lead to a greater team success. Sometimes that's just a hard thing to kind of come by, but this is why intangibles are so important for a young player. That's why I say when the Lakers had a process and they followed through with Jalen Hood-Schifino as their pick, I think that was a huge reason behind it. That's extremely important, and that's what leads to long NBA careers. And in Lewis's case, I'm sure he was that role player in Pepperdine before, and he had to accept more of a defensive role until his skill set expanded. Well, what did his game look before that? He just has to revert to that guy who is a little bit more of a defensive playmaker, and then maybe over time he can show off those offensive skills that he was originally drafted for.
Kind of piggybacking onto the reverse of what Brian just asked, Maxwell Lewis playing likely means things have gone sideways for the season. But it's a little bit different with Hood-Schifino as a mid-first round pick. And you actually ended up getting a little bit into a Twitter thread that I had, responding to a lot of Laker fans at Cam Brothers hitting me up, saying that they didn't think there was any way Darvin will ever play Hood-Schifino because he doesn't want to play rookies. Like most coaches, if they can avoid it, don't want to play rookies. But they kept bringing up Max Christie as the example of why Darvin won't play Hood-Schifino. And you agreed with what I was saying, that there were a lot of contextual differences between Hood-Schifino and Christie. And I just wanted to have you share what you think is sort of the difference that makes it not a guarantee that Hood-Schifino will actually get minutes, but that the cases are different for him versus Christie.
So in Max Christie's case, if you kind of looked at a player profile from college and you looked at his statistics, it's not impressive. I think it's like a 36% shooter, a guy that didn't get a whole wealth of playing time, a whole wealth of usage, any of the above. When Christie, I had Christie at number 32 last year, and I think that's actually where the Lakers picked him. And when they chose him, I was thinking about, oh, he's from Michigan State. He's probably got the intangibles behind him that will show that he'll work really hard. And by mid-season, I was already noticing changes into his jump shot where it was a little bit more refined, a little quicker on the release. Towards the end of the season, I was seeing, hey, he's trying to fight physically on defense. The frame may not be there yet, but I can see that he's trying to push and shove a little bit and just fight back in that kind of sense. And those are the things that are hard to actually scout for if you can't really find it at the college level. But it also ties into the intangibles being important where, oh, you're seeing the hard work pay off really early. Now, in Hood-Schifino's case, he had the usage, right? He had opportunities, he had reps. There are plenty of plays during the season where we've seen Hood-Schifino defend that point of attack position, where we've seen Hood-Schifino play in big games against big-time opponents and get over 35 points against Purdue. He stepped up in those critical moments, and from that sense, he may be thought of as the more refined player with certain skills, and that's definitely a fair assessment, right? Especially considering when I had mentioned in our prior podcast that the tiers of the draft between the 15th pick and the 45th pick are really close. I think there's 2. And I had other Laker fans asking me, oh, where would Max Christie be picked in this year if you didn't see him play in the NBA? I still said mid-second. And he might be towards that latter part of the tier only because he didn't have that great season that even Hood-Schifino has. Now it's going to be a battle for playing time, right? Because we haven't seen Christie since the end of the season, and who knows what he's working on now. And then Hood-Schifino is in the middle of the longest season of his
career. We really
career.
haven't seen Christie since about mid-January, to be honest. Like
right.
he barely played beyond mid-January.
Right. And the thing I'm mindful of is the college season to the rookie year is the longest year that I think they go through as professionals. It's college season, the tournament, you have the NBA draft, you have the workouts, it's summer league. Sometimes they do something post-summer league. I know Jordan Clarkson did a tournament in Canada after that just to excel, and then they get a few months off, and then the season starts. It's already training camp. So that's a lot of what happens when players hit the wall, especially as a rookie. And sometimes that's also a big part of why they don't get that as much early playing time as expected, even if they were higher draft picks.
Mm-hmm. I just thought it was interesting with Christie. Like, there was so much enthusiasm about how he played, and I think it was deserved. I think he showed a lot of potential, but he was also being graded on a curve because he was, the expectation was that he wasn't going to play, that he probably wouldn't play well, and he came in and like performed pretty well but like if you broke down the numbers of what it looked like when he was on the floor, they were generally not very good. And as you're trying to crank up a desperate effort to get in the playoffs, he's not a guy you're going to put on the floor. And so I understood it. And I think he'll get better, and, good for him for holding his own, but he was, in my mind, clearly being graded on a curve by most fans. Before we go, a few minutes on Colin Castleton and D'Moy Hodge, the two guys the Lakers signed with their two-way deals. Hodge is interesting because he was a high volume, effective 3-point shooter at Missouri. So that's a skill set that every team is looking for. This guy can bury 3-pointers. But Castleton, as I know is a guy that you were particularly excited about as a center, played 3 years, I believe, at Florida. What do you like about him?
So Castleton is just a really mobile big, as in he rebounds the ball. He's able to pass from the high post. He actually likes taking, getting the defensive rebound, pushing the ball down court, and actually making passes in transition. And he has a soft touch. He's unusually good at floaters and kind of general shots around the rim. So there's a lot of base level offensive skill sets that it's like, hey, this guy might be pretty good. And then on the defensive end, he was blocking a lot of shots, and he's not a guy that has a tremendous vert, but getting blocked shots based off timing and meeting players at the top of their shot is very difficult to do. And he was able to do that. So there's a spot for him to be an effective defensive player who's at least some sort of defensive threat, as well as, hey, he provides some things on offense. Maybe he opens up the playbook a little bit because he's a better passer than he's giving credit for. So that's why I was really excited about Castleton.
Why do you think he's somebody that went undrafted? Like, if you had to look at what his weaknesses would be, what do you think they are?
I think the NBA places a lot of emphasis on 3-point shooting from a big, or they have to be so good at several defensive coverages or be a specialist at, say, drop coverage. Oh, this guy has to be so good at drop coverage from the jump. When I see a pick and roll, I need to see him contest that jump shot really well. It's really difficult to do that. And frankly, there weren't even a lot of bigs in this actually in this draft overall. And even Derek Lively was drafted really high, and he was still a very foul prone, granted, great at drop coverage, but is still a foul prone center who's great at, finishing with on lob dunks. And he didn't even have a great 3-point percentage. It just showed in workout sessions. So I think the NBA teams are banking on that potential. And sometimes a player like Castleton is a guy that developed multiple skills through multiple years of college, and it still pans out. Sometimes it just takes a little bit later, but it doesn't matter as long as they stick.
These two-way positions are important. I mean, do you see him as a guy with like reasonable potential to develop into a rotation capable big in the NBA?
So there's this aspect about centers that I appreciate, which is if they're able to rebound and they're able to block shots, and they're able to rotate defensively, I'm okay with them getting out muscled in the paint. The NBA has giants. They're going to need help. Everybody needs help, frankly. But if they're able to, like I said, compete defensively, rebound, just provide something on offense. How often do you see a center with a floater? If they have a floater out to 10 feet, that's really important working out of the high post. That's kind of who I see him as. Like, he'll run a horn set, maybe use a high pick and roll, or if he does that high pick and roll thing, he'll end up with a floater from mid-range, and that's something that'll work for him. So there's definitely a path for him. I've seen centers completely change their archetype. Brook Lopez was a post player, and then he became this 3-point shooter that's really great at drop coverage out of nowhere, right? These guys can mold in ways that in whatever way they want. It's just really up to them and how much they want to get it.
And then finally, they took your guy Alex Fudge for an Exhibit 10 contract. You were talking about him with us. You must have been stoked out of your mind.
He's a phenomenal athlete. I'm not kidding when I say I hope he gets a lot of summer league highlights, because what he does is force turnovers. He blocks shots at the rim. He pushes the ball down court. And if there's a 7-footer under the rim in transition, he just wants to dunk on them. There's several highlights of this, and he's really good at it. He's eye level with the rim kind of dunking. So those are the kind of highlights I'm looking for. And once again, that all ties into what South Bay is great at. The South Bay Lakers, they're really great at defensive players, high motor guys that are able to finish in transition. And whether it's Gary Payton or David Nwaba or Alex Caruso, I want Fudge to follow in those general footsteps and hopefully find that similar success.
And he and Castleton were teammates, correct?
Yes, they were.
So if you're going to throw darts with those Exhibit 10 contracts, that's the kind of guy you want to throw a dart with.
Absolutely, especially guys that are aware of what they can do defensively and they take chances and they're successful at it. Hey, I know I can pickpocket this guy. I know I can get into this passing lane. I can block this 7-foot setter shot. No problem. I got this. That's the kind of guy you're looking for sure.
All right. Great rundown. I mean, I feel much more knowledgeable about these guys than I did about 37 minutes ago when we started. So I appreciate everybody's hanging in and the enthusiasm with which they responded to Wednesday's show last week with Mike. And we really appreciate Mike's willingness to come back and break this all down, because obviously tremendous interest in these players as we get into summer league and into the season. First draft the Lakers have used in a long time. So Mike, thank you again so much for coming on. This was great. We appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Thank you for making the time.
Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you can go to see the show, hang out with nearly 18,000 subscribers, leave questions, leave comments. We will use them throughout the summer as we get into summer league and free agency and all that good stuff. The season is starting to take shape. It's getting exciting already to look forward to next year. We'll see everybody on Tuesday.